In the blistering summer of 1942, the German war machine seemed unstoppable. Operation Blue drove relentlessly across the southern steppes of the Soviet Union. The primary objective was the oil fields of the Caucasus, but a secondary, symbolic prize lay on the banks of the Volga River, Stalingrad. For Adolf Hitler, capturing the city bearing his nemesis's name became a fanatical obsession, a matter of personal pride that would override all military logic. For Joseph Stalin, its defense became a matter of national survival. The German Sixth Army, led by General Friedrich Paulus, was one of the most powerful and battle-hardened formations in the world. They advanced with over 250,000 men, confident this industrial city would fall within weeks. Neither side could comprehend the scale of the inferno that was about to be unleashed. The assault on the city began not with soldiers, but with an apocalypse from the air. On August 23, 1942, Luftwaffe unleashed the most intense carpet bombing of the war to date. Over 1,000 tons of bombs rained down, creating a firestorm that engulfed Stalingrad. The asphalt on the roads melted, wooden houses vanished in an instant, and the city's massive grain silos burned for weeks. Over 40,000 civilians were killed in the first 48 hours. A massacre intended to shatter Soviet morale. But it had the opposite effect. The inferno reduced the city to a skeleton of shattered buildings, jagged ruins, and mountains of rubble. It was this very destruction that, paradoxically, created the perfect battlefield for the defenders. It became a fortress of ruins, unpassable for tanks, and a deadly maze for the German infantry. As German shock troops pushed into the ruins, the Soviet 62nd Army under General Vasily Chuikov was faced with a simple, brutal reality. Stalin's order number 127 had been read to every soldier, not one step back. The directive was uncompromising. Any soldier or officer who retreated without orders was to be considered a traitor and shot by blocking detachments of the NKVD secret police positioned behind the front lines. The Soviet soldier was trapped, with the German machine gunners to his front and the commissar's pistol to his back. This draconian measure stiffened the defense into one of suicidal resolve. There was no escape, no surrender. The only choice was to fight, to die, or to kill. The city's only connection to the outside world, its artery of life and death, was the Volga River. Spanning nearly a mile wide, it was the single lifeline for the 62nd Army, under constant, ferocious bombardment from German artillery and Stuka dive bombers. Ferries and simple fishing boats made the crossing. They carried reinforcements, ammunition, and small rations of food from the east bank to the west. They returned carrying the wounded, a journey many did not survive. The river was a gauntlet of fire, its water churning with explosions and stained with blood. General Chuikov famously remarked, "For every soldier who crossed the Volga, another was often carried back, wounded or dead." This perilous lifeline was just enough to keep the battle going, feeding men into the meat grinder day after day. Inside the city, conventional warfare ceased to exist. The battle devolved into a savage, close-quarters nightmare the Germans called Rattenkrieg, the Rat War. The front line was not a line at all, but a chaotic, three-dimensional blur that snaked through buildings, sewers, and basements. The average life expectancy for a new Soviet reinforcement was less than 24 hours. Fighting was not for streets, but for individual floors, rooms, and even stairwells. Soviet storm groups, small teams of 5 to 8 men armed with submachine guns, grenades, and sharpened shovels, would clear buildings room by room. They would blow holes in walls to move between apartments, creating hidden passages and deadly ambush points. The fighting was intimate, brutal, and constant. This war of rats was defined by symbolic strongpoints, places where human endurance was tested beyond all imaginable limits. One was the massive grain elevator, a concrete silo where a handful of Soviet soldiers held out for weeks, fighting off dozens of German assaults until they finally ran out of ammunition and water. But the most famous was Pavlov's house. A small platoon led by Sergeant Yakov Pavlov seized a 4-story apartment building, overlooking a key square, for 58 days. This tiny garrison held the building, transforming it into an impregnable fortress. They surrounded it with minefields, set up machine gun nests in the windows, and knocked holes in the walls to create firing positions. This single building became a symbol of the entire defense, a defiant, unyielding rock against which the German tide broke. In this ruined landscape of broken steel and concrete, a new kind of warrior emerged as a decisive weapon, the sniper. The ruins offered infinite hiding places, and Soviet snipers began a methodical, psychological war against the invaders. They waged hunter-killer duels, patiently waiting for hours, sometimes days, for a single, perfect shot. Men like Vasily Zaitsev became national heroes, his tally of kills rising into the hundreds. The sniperism movement demoralized the German troops, who knew that a single moment of carelessness, a flash of binoculars, the glint of a helmet could mean instant death. Officers were afraid to show their rank, and soldiers were terrified to leave their cover. The sniper proved that one man with a rifle could be as effective as a tank. The battle was not just fought by soldiers. Tens of thousands of civilians, mostly women and children, were trapped in the city, caught between the two armies. They hid in cellars and makeshift dugouts, enduring constant shelling, starvation, and the bitter cold. Their suffering was immense, yet their resolve was a key part of the defense. In the northern factory district, the Red October steel plant and the Dzerzhinsky tractor factory, civilians continued to work even as the battle raged around them. Workers and militia units fought alongside soldiers. They would repair a T-34 tank at one end of a workshop, while German infantry was breaking in at the other. The battle line sometimes ran directly through the factory floor. This was total war, where the distinction between soldier and civilian had evaporated. While the 62nd Army bled for every meter of rubble, a grand strategy was taking shape far from the city. At Stavka, the Soviet High Command, General Georgy Zhukov and General Alexander Vasilevsky, were quietly amassing a colossal force. They had stripped the rest of the Soviet front, gathering over 1 million men, 13,000 artillery pieces, and nearly 1,500 tanks. The plan was audacious and simple. They would not try to relieve the city directly. Instead, they would let the Germans exhaust themselves in the urban grinder, all while preparing to massive pincers to strike the weak, overstretched German flanks. These flanks were held not by Germans, but by their poorly equipped Romanian, Italian, and Hungarian allies. The operation, codenamed Uranus, was prepared in absolute secrecy. On November 19, 1942, in the middle of a blinding blizzard, Operation Uranus was unleashed. The sky exploded as thousands of Soviet artillery guns opened fire, a hurricane of steel that shattered the Romanian positions north and south of the city. Then the signal was given. Hundreds of Soviet T-34 tanks, built for the harsh Russian winter, churned through the snowdrifts, followed by waves of white camouflaged infantry. The Allied Axis troops, lacking anti-tank guns and proper winter clothing, were completely overrun. Their front lines dissolved in hours. The Soviet tank corps raced across the frozen steppe, their objective not Stalingrad, but a small bridge at the town of Kalach, deep in the German rear. In just 4 days, the trap snapped shut. The two Soviet pincers met at Kalach, linking up and sealing the noose. The German 6th Army, along with parts of the 4th Panzer Army, over 150,000 men, were completely encircled. The hunters had instantly become the hunted. General Paulus, stunned, pleaded with Hitler for permission to break out. Hitler, enraged, refused. He declared Stalingrad a festing, a fortress, and forbade any retreat. He promised the 6th Army they would be supplied from the air. Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe, rashly guaranteed he could deliver the 500 tons of supplies needed every day. This was a fantasy. The German army was now trapped in a frozen cauldron, or Kessel, 100 miles from the nearest friendly lines. Now, the Soviets' most powerful and merciless ally took full command, General Winter. The temperatures plummeted to depths the Germans had never experienced, falling to -30 and then -40 degrees Celsius. The trapped soldiers, still in their summer weight uniforms, began to freeze to death. Frostbite claimed thousands, turning feet and hands black. There was no food. They ate their horses, then boiled the bones for broth, and finally resorted to cannibalism. Lice, typhus, and dysentery ravaged the starving, freezing ranks. Their equipment failed. Tank engines wouldn't start, machine guns froze solid, and mortar rounds wouldn't fire. The Kessel became a frozen hell, a mass grave where men simply lay down in the snow and died. A final, desperate attempt was made to save the Sixth Army. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, one of Germany's ablest commanders, assembled a relief force named Operation Winterstorm. His panzer divisions slammed into the Soviet outer ring, fighting heroically in the blizzard to open a corridor. They came within 30 miles of the Kessel, close enough for Paulus's starving troops to see the flares. But the Red Army, anticipating the move, threw their own Second Guards Army into the fight. In a brutal tank battle, they stopped Manstein cold. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe bridge was a catastrophic failure. On its best day, it delivered less than a fifth of the needed supplies. Soviet anti-aircraft guns and fighters turned the sky into a shooting gallery, destroying hundreds of transport planes. All hope was lost. The end came slowly and agonizingly. The Soviets launched Operation Ring, a final offensive to liquidate the Kessel. They systematically sliced the pocket in two, their artillery pounding the remaining Germans into submission. Hitler, in a final act of delusional spite, promoted Paulus to Field Marshal. No German Field Marshal had ever surrendered, and the message was clear. Paulus was expected to commit suicide. But Paulus chose to live. On January 31, 1943, a broken, starving, and lice-ridden Paulus emerged from his headquarters in the basement of a ruined department store and surrendered. Over the next 2 days, the last 91,000 survivors of the Sixth Army laid down their arms. When the guns finally fell silent, Stalingrad was not a city, it was a graveyard of rubble, twisted steel, and the bones of over 1.5 million soldiers and civilians. Of the 91,000 Germans who surrendered, only 5,000 would ever see their homeland again. The Soviet Union had suffered casualties on a scale that is nearly impossible to comprehend. But it had survived. The victory at Stalingrad was more than a military triumph. It was a profound moral and psychological turning point. The myth of German invincibility, forged in the blitzkriegs of Poland and France, was shattered forever on the frozen banks of the Volga. The spinal column of the Wehrmacht had been broken. From this point forward, the Red Army would only advance. The long, bloody road to Berlin had begun.